Hi guys. So I get a lot of questions regularly on how I take my photos, how I take my photos by myself, and how I go through the editing process. So I wanted to give a little more detail on how I do this. So here is the final results of a photo that I took today at a waterfall in Oregon. So let's go through everything step by step. So here is the raw photo, not edited or anything. I know it's super underexposed. I really should increase the exposure, but yeah, I kind of wanted to capture this sunburst that was really important to me. And yeah, so the first thing I do is I go through my presets that I have developed over time, and I usually put it on, and then I continue the editing process. So preset is the very minimum of editing that I do. So usually the stuff I post on Instagram, I actually just kind of stick to one preset and I just go through editing from there, but it's this random desaturated buildings. I know it's not as desaturated buildings. I kind of just use that for a common thing I used to use it for, but now I just apply it to all my photos and then tweak it from there. But as you can see, it is much different from the final version that you see here. So just because you apply a preset doesn't mean that you are going to get this photo. There is a lot of layers that go into the editing process. So first of all, this is how it looks with the preset. I am going to crop it the way I want, kind of just as it's usually like the first thing I do because otherwise it really annoys me. So I'm gonna align everything so it's all like straight. And as you can see, so the rule of thirds is extremely important, and it's kind of how, when I arrive to a location, it's automatically how I'm looking at the scene. So as you can see, the waterfall is in the middle, and the very top here is kind of touching this line, and then I'm gonna have the bottom of the waterfall touching this line. And if you can tell, a lot of the subjects or main points are on certain points or lines, and that naturally draws your eye to that photo. So for Instagram's sake, I'm gonna do 8 by 10, line everything up the way I want it. So yeah, that's perfect because that's the main part we want, and that gives it that nice balance at top, and then having me on this line here gives it a nice balance as well. Yeah, so let's see how that is. I might tweak it a little more to bring it up, but yeah, other than that, looks good. Amazing. So from here, we're gonna increase the exposure to kind of get a better idea of like what we're looking at here. So let's increase it to 1, and then so the photo kind of it's very cold, and because we have this nice sunburst, we want to give it a little bit more warmth, right? So second thing I do, I'll increase the temperature, let's say 6800 Kelvin, and that gives it that nice warm glow to it. So now when we're looking at a scene, we're envisioning, what are we trying to portray here? What are we trying to bring to life? And so when I'm looking at this, obviously the waterfall, this side subject, which is myself, and I like putting myself in photos kind of as a unique piece, but also for scale. So, you know, growing up, I would take photos and my dad would say, you know, you could have just downloaded that off of Google Images. And so to give it a little bit of extra, I started adding myself, but you have to be very strategic about it. So I'll usually place myself off to the side, and also me looking at the waterfall kind of naturally directs your eye towards like, okay, what is she looking at, you know? So yeah, it's an extra added element that I feel like gives it a little bit extra. So we have the subject, we have the waterfall, the sunburst, and then we also have these basalt columns, and those are extremely unique as well. So let's begin. So we are going to start masking those details. So Lightroom has this incredible new feature where you can just select the subject and it automatically does it. I used to have to paint everything myself. It would be such a tedious process, and they just made my life so easy. Anyways, so let's go. So for masking, I have also developed certain presets, whether it's for the sky, for certain subjects, and then, yeah, for myself, portraits, etc. So for this, I'm going to select portraits. And then as you can see, it lightened it a little bit, but it's still kind of dark. So we're going to increase the exposure, 0.5, add a little more warmth to it. And then, yeah, I think that's looking good so far. Maybe a little more dehaze. That kind of gives a little more contrast. Maybe a little more. Yeah. All right. So, yeah, we're going to start with that. And then let's go over the waterfall. Unfortunately, there isn't an option for a waterfall, so we have to do the good old-fashioned way. But when we do this, when I paint subjects that I don't want necessarily a hard edge, because sometimes that gives it a little more unnatural, because you can tell, you know, it's very subject. So I'll use a feather, like a really high feather, to give it that like softened edge. So we are going to paint over this. This is going to be really rough because I've already finished the edit for this photo, but just to give you an idea of like how I go about this process, right? So amazing. And then I'm also going to use my portraits masking preset, because I know it's going to bring up the exposure. It's going to give it a little more clarity and sharpness and that little extra oomph to it. So beautiful, brings up the whites and everything, just beautifully pure. All right, so the last thing we want to do to bring up is the basalt columns on either side of the waterfall. Boop, boop. So create new mask, one more, and we're just gonna paint over. Nothing too fancy, but it just gives it that little extra edge we like. So like that. And then let's go portraits again, just because it lightens it a little bit. It's a little much, so let's decrease the exposure to 0.15. All right, so that's looking good. And then we're gonna do one more mask. It's not really necessary, but we want to focus more on the waterfall and above. And so we're gonna do a linear gradient at the bottom and darken it, just so your eye naturally goes more up in the photo. It draws your eye not towards the waterfall, you know. It's very subtle, you know, but I just think it adds a little bit. So for that, it honestly just decreases exposure, just like that. Yeah, so I think we're pretty much good. Let's compare. We're gonna compare with the final photo. That's pretty spot on. I guess I increased this a little more than I thought, and then I increased the exposure on myself a little more. But yeah, in general, that gives you a good idea. Oh, you know, one more thing I probably did. The tone curve. So this is another little extra thing that I do at the end. It gives you just a little more contrast and brings up the blacks and the contrast. So yeah, naturally you're going to want to create an S curve with this. See, so it increases the exposure just a little bit, but then it also brings out the blacks and the contrast. Yeah, so you get a little more oomph. So yeah, I think besides that, also luminance. So there's a little bit of grain. You honestly probably wouldn't notice it, but for myself, maybe it's a little OCD thing that I do. It's just to decrease the noise. So yeah, that is pretty much it. So comparing, I'm not going to go through all of it, but it just gives you guys an idea of how I go through this editing process. So I hope that helps. Let me know if you have any questions or comments. And if you like it, then I would be happy to do more of these. I'm trying to be a little more transparent, I guess, in how I do my photography and my work and everything. So hopefully this gives you a better understanding and picture. So yeah, thank you guys.